3, 2, 1, action! Hey guys, Bruce Kittle here. In this episode, we are anticipating, so the Niners are playing the Dolphins this weekend here in Levi Stadium. And that's on December 4th. And the next week is December 7th, which is Pearl Harbor Day. So this show is all about Pearl Harbor Day, and it tells the story of Ed Hayes, who was in law school at the University of Iowa. So we've got a lot of Iowa connections in this story. And during his first semester of law school, Pearl Harbor was bombed on December 7th, 1941, which obviously pulled the United States into World War II. And it is a story told by Ed's son, which is Andy Hayes, and then his son, who is Curtis Hayes. But Curtis is also Command Sergeant Major Curtis Hayes, who in year 2 of the podcast was the primary person overseeing the recruiting battalion and veterans in the California area for the California National Guard. And he is the person who helped us each week find and get tickets to veterans to attend the game. So as you guys might remember, last year, I think we always sent typically 6 or more veterans to every game, whether it was in California or whether it was somewhere else. And Curtis was the one who helped us do that. So, but in that process, we learned of his grandfather, Ed, and his story about Pearl Harbor interrupting his life and then service, and really was gone for 4 years during the war after the draft in 41. So anyway, this is a really heartwarming, enriching story about his tale, and it's got a lot of connections to Iowa. So those folks who care about that, and if you don't, it's still pretty cool. We also have on Pat Coen. If you might remember, Pat is married to my wife's youngest sister, Jenna. So he's my brother-in-law, and Pat has 21-year career in the Iowa National Guard and Army with a couple of deployments in that. And Pat's show, I'll list that in there, but there's an episode where we did Pat's story. But Pat's on just because the whole family and Ed and his family were from the Mount Pleasant area and Henry County, which is where Pat is from, and also all of the Kraegers on my wife's side of the family. So a lot of overlap. So anyway, great story about engagement, about service, about commitment, about loyalty, about giving back. And a lot of just kind of nuggets about living life and thinking about the bigger picture. So I know you're going to enjoy this show, and please do so, and look for ways to give back. And just a quick shout out from Curtis, just talking about, again, we're about military veterans, our partnership with Emerging Vets and Players. We're proud this year for George to wear Emerging Vets and Players for his My Cleats, My Cause. And just a reminder to anybody out there who might hear this, to if you're an employer at all in a corporation or otherwise, to remember veterans out there. And so there's some in the show notes, there's links to the Skills Bridge program, which is offered by the Department of Defense, but is helping corporations partner with them to place and properly train and help in that transition stage for military personnel leaving and getting back into the working world and helping with those transitions. So if you're in that category and you think you might be interested, please check the show notes for that. So anyway, enjoy this with Pat Coen, Curtis Hayes, and Andy Hayes, and Ed Hayes with his wife Cora. We're floating around, and you'll feel their spirit in this show. So thank you very much. All right. Bruce Kittle here with the Hidden Pearls podcast. I am with CSM Curtis Hayes. He said I can call him Curt or Curtis today, so I'll do that. And then his father, Andy Hayes. And so we're very excited to have them on the show. We're anticipating brother-in-law Pat Coen, and I'll add his episode that we did with Pat into the show notes. So Pat's going to join us just because he's from the Mount Pleasant area, but he was having some tech stuff and we got to get rolling. So I'm just going to give a little bit of backstory as we get rolling on this thing. So both of you, and so really this kind of whole thing started. So Pat, being in Iowa National Guard and 21 years there, a year ago, we kind of transitioned from doing nonprofits to working with the military. And this year, of course, then we ended up partnering with Emerging Vets and Players. But in order to, each week we were sending veterans to the games, and Curtis was, if I get it right, but anyway, Command Sergeant Major over the recruiting battalion in California. So Pat talked to the recruiting battalion person back in Iowa. And of course, all those fancy recruiting battalion dudes all know each other. Anyway, so we got hooked up, and Curtis did a terrific job and helped us all year really no matter where we were at. And it was really turned into a really cool thing. So each week you'd give me a name, somebody, whether it was in Chicago or whatever, and it was all good. Whoop, here's old Uncle Pat. So let's see if we can, there he goes. All right, we'll see. Anyway, so we got hooked up. Pat, you got to unmute and turn on the video. Look at that. There's his amazing wife. Hey, we're already recording, Jenna. If you want to get in on the show, geez, you should have just told me. All right. All right, you got to unmute.
There we go.
All right.
He's
Perfect.
all yours.
Morning.
Hi, Colonel. How you doing?
Good.
All right, I'm already doing the intro. We're already recording, so you're just stuck with it. So you'll have to ride along. I'm just telling how we got going, and you're going to jump in. I was just telling the story. You got the Iowa National Guard recruiting battalion guy, and he hooked us up. And so Curt helped us all last year with that, and then handed it off to Cortez. Or I'm sorry, what's our new guy's name? I can't remember now.
Oh, Costa.
Costa, yeah.
Yes.
And he's done a great job too with us everywhere we've traveled. So we're still doing that this year, 4 to 6 members of the military and various components. So we're really excited about that. So that's been really fun. So and in that process along the way, so as Curt and I were kind of talking, doing all those kind of things, he said, hey, by the way, we have a little bit of an Iowa connection, which I didn't know because you're in California. And your Iowa connection really, was your dad, Andy, who's on. So we're grateful for that. But it goes all the way back to your grandfather and Andy's dad, Ed Hayes. So Ed Hayes was born in New London and then grew up in Mount Pleasant. And we'll get to those stories in a little bit. And the reason we're doing the show this week is just because in the midst of Ed, he went to the University of Iowa, got an accounting degree, and we'll fill in all those gaps. But then he started law school after his graduation. And in his first semester of law school, Pearl Harbor was hit, December 7th, 1941. And so with December 7th coming up next week, we thought this was a really fitting time to kind of tell that story just about who he was as a person, how Pearl Harbor fit into his life, and then his military service. And then I'm kind of intrigued with it just because of his Iowa Law School connection and the legal side of things. And then also his very lengthy and distinguished career at Drake University Law School, where he was professor, associate dean, about everything you can imagine. He probably swept the floor too and all that kind of stuff. So, but we're going to get to all that. So that's why we're doing this. And again, this is really kind of just a remembrance to think about. I went back and I watched a couple of videos on Pearl Harbor. I've been there twice and gone through the memorial, that kind of thing. And so it really was a day, when I was growing up, was a really big deal, in our household and all that kind of stuff. My dad was in the Air Force, didn't see any combat, but and so kind of think that's good to do. So I'm grateful that we have this opportunity to kind of think about that whole era and that generation, because that generation, as we all know, is kind of passing away and is going to be a memory here in the next whatever years as folks get older. So we're really grateful to do that. So I'm really grateful for that. And Pat, we're glad to have you on. You're not nearly as good looking as the rest of us, but you've been in the military. And I just thought too about the Mount Pleasant stuff was kind of a cool connection. So we'll kind of get to that. So how about we've talked a little bit about that. I want to just go with Curt, if you want to open us up a little bit. So I've got you. You started in 1997. You joined the military after graduating high school in California. Is it Cupertino? Am I saying that?
Cupertino, not too far from where you are.
1995, I'm sure a very distinguished academic career there and all kinds of things. But anyway,
we tell the story that we passed civics together that last year.
No doubt. That's nothing wrong with that, man. Good to get good coaching. So it's great. All right. And then born in Chicago, and then you moved to California, and you noted in the bio in 1986 after the Bears won the Super Bowl after spanking the Patriots, which that was a great victory. And I had some good friends that I played with at Iowa that were on that team. Mark Bortz and Jay Hilgenberg was the starting center, and Mark was the guard. And then we knew some of the other guys too. So that was a really fun team. That was great. Remember the Super Bowl shuffle? I might have have that. So anyway, all right. And the fridge. Okay. So anyway, Curt, maybe just give us a little bit of story. And Pat, I've already referenced you that we're going to put your episode in because Pat was on the show and we kind of talked about his career as well. But Curt, talk to us a little bit about you enlisting infantry into the Army and what drew you in and why you picked the Army.
So I had attempted 2 years of junior college at De Anza, down on Stevens Creek. And I was a great athlete. I was good at baseball, but I was a horrible student. So I carried over my educational patterns into junior college. So I just wasn't. You can't do both. Be a good athlete, but a bad student. So I ended up joining the military, and 1997, July of '97, shipped off to Fort Benning, Georgia, as an 11 X-ray, which is where basically you have kind of given yourselves up to the infantry gods, and they will determine which MOS they need you to be based on the needs of the Army at that point in time. It so happened to be 11 Mike, a mechanized infantryman, was my calling. So I went through the 11 Bravo course and then followed on with the 11 Mike school to learn about the Bradley fighting vehicle. From there, I thought I was done with Georgia and would be shipped off to somewhere amongst, in the world. But no, I went to the other side of Georgia to Fort Stewart over by Savannah. So for 3 years, I was there. Initially, right when I first got there, we went to Fort Irwin in California, and I had to defend California from people that had never been to California in my unit because they thought that was all California was that desert Mojave area. And there's a lot more to California, obviously, than the Mojave Desert. But we went from there, and that was train up for us to go to Kuwait for Desert Fox in August of 1998, where we were out in the fob, just in the middle of the Kuwaiti desert. We got there in August, got off the plane. It was 112. It was midnight, and so that was awful. But then we were there up until the point in time where the dictator in Iraq was starting to throw the UN inspectors out that were in country, and we actually combat loaded 2 times and sat on the border, getting ready for preparations to potentially go over. But that never came to fruition. So we packed up and came home right in time for Christmas of 1998. From there, I finished out my time in Georgia, and I joined actually the Nevada Army National Guard and moved to Las Vegas, and I became a 11 Charlie and Mortarman because they didn't have 11 mics in California or in Nevada at that time. So from there, I ended up living in Las Vegas for 2 years and did a traditional guard as a traditional guardsman. And I moved back to California, and within a year of being back in California, OIF2, I got called up for OIF2. And so I went to North Fort Lewis in
hey, Curt, and that's Operation Iraqi Freedom 2. Am I getting that right?
Yeah,
okay,
yes,
just for folks that are listening. Okay.
Yeah, Operation Iraqi Freedom 2. Did our train up in North Fort Lewis, Washington, and then in March of 2004 to March of 2005, we were in country in Iraq. I was at CSC Scania, which is about an hour and a half south of Baghdad, and then also Forward Operating Base, or FOB Kalsu, which was about 30 minutes north of where CSC Scania was. While we were there, we were doing combat patrols. I also was on a scout sniper team. They made me the pack mule. I was the radio transmitter guy, and I carried the saw so that in case anything happened, I was ready to lay down suppressive fire so we could exfil out of the area. It was a 3-man team. Those two were I'm still really good friends with those 2 individuals, Dennis and James. And that's kind of what makes the military fun or tolerable, if you will, is those that you embrace to suck with. And I imagine it's very similar onto a football team. Things can be tough, but the friends and the buddies and those that are around you are the ones that make it what it is. And so so to this day, I still keep it's like I never missed a minute with them when you call them and talk to them and just pick up where you left off. But after I got back from Iraq, I went to New Orleans for Hurricane Katrina to help aid in the relief after Hurricane Katrina came through. So I was in New Orleans for a month, and the devastation there was, you can only imagine how bad it was. The water levels were extremely high. And honestly, my living conditions in Iraq were better than I had in New Orleans at that time. it began to progress over time, and people started to come back to try and pick their lives back up. But it was more or less to pick up and figure out what's next for them. Returning from there, that's when I joined recruiting in 2006. And I started as a recruiter there in San Jose, California, and just progressed and just continued to move and navigate my career into positions of greater responsibility that culminated in my current position, or my past current position, as a command sergeant major for the state, overseeing all recruiting operations. This has been a very tough road this last couple of years with COVID, school closures and things to that nature. But our recruiters, the resilience they showed at this time to go and continue to give life-changing opportunities to young men and women, it's been awe-inspiring of what they were able to achieve. So that's my story.
Well, I appreciate that very much. So thanks for sharing that. And if we didn't have Ed's story to do, there's a lot in there that I'm sure would be very worth kind of unpacking a little bit. I guess I just want to touch on the relationships and the friends, so that's one of the things, so our partners with Merging Vets and Players, and they actually do bring the athletes together with the vets. That's kind of what the huddle theories are all about. And that is certainly a consistent theme, is the closeness of those relationships. And it's really interesting too, even in the huddles where, certain members didn't actually serve together, but because they both served, or so many people had that kind of common experience, those relationships forged pretty quickly in that regard as well. So certainly pretty good. Pat, he went a lot. We've already heard your story a little bit. Anything you want to fill in or chat with, or maybe not?
Well, actually, just the World War II, the New London, the Mount Pleasant connection, those things. Iowa, of course, my wife's family. Just the countless Kragers that have gone through the University of Iowa. But then your father and Drake University. I got my master's degree and my EDS degree from Drake University. Right. And so Drake has played a role in our family throughout generations of cranking out some educational leaders, those type of things. So there's a lot there. Our history is interwoven, and we didn't even know it.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to hearing from Dad.
Yeah.
Sergeant Major, great. I apprete you, but I want to hear what your dad has to say.
I got you, sir. I understand. I'm not the star.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Because it's intriguing. There for the longest time, I would get phone calls, and they wanted me to bury World War II veterans and present the flag, and they didn't have enough people to do this. And on a particular day, I got a call from a senator's office, and they're saying, "Hey, you got to be in Burlington at this time to bury this Marine." And then the individual on the phone, it wasn't the senator, obviously, but they said, "Don't mess this one up." And it kind of pissed me off. I don't care who the hell I'm burying. I'm not gonna screw it up. I may unintentionally, but why would he think this soldier's worth any more than the others? Got there as a Marine. I'm standing at the head of the casket, and the eulogy starts, and the minister starts calling him old half-ass. And you maintain composure. You act like you're supposed to act. You do what you're supposed to do with great honor and dignity for the family. We get done, and the old Marine Corps league standing there, and I'm like, "Guys, what the hell is this half-ass shit?" I thought one of you was going to get up and punch the priest. You know what I mean? Because Marines stick together. And they said, "Oh, you didn't know?" And I'm like, "No." He was. They were attacking an island in the Pacific, and they were running up the hill. Of course, mortar round comes in, boom. And at the time, he's the senior person still alive. He's a corporal. And he tells all the other Marines, "Hey, guys, we got to keep moving or we're going to die here." And in the process, half of his ass was blown off. Of course, I didn't know that. You know what I mean? I wish I would have before I got there. So I'm looking forward to, and he fought like that for several days before he was taken out. But anyway, I'm looking forward to hearing about your dad. Because this kind of stuff is so intriguing, and just the roles that people played in protecting the world from evil, and your dad was part of that. And I can't wait to hear it. So I'll stop with that. And I want to thank both of you for being here today, and Bruce for bringing us together, because this is where people understand, people grow, and people heal. and people do the right thing to assure they're protecting the future of freedom. So I'll stop now, but thank you.
All right. I appreciate it. Thank you, Pat. So, and Curtis, before we kind of jump into that, I guess, because we talk a lot on the show with military, particularly about transitions. And so, so you've been in and you're still in. So actually just in the middle of your transition into some new stuff. And we're going to talk about your new endeavors, more toward the end of the show. But, I guess is returning back, from your deployments, were there transition issues or anything like that? And again, I don't want to shortchange it all, but I guess I'm just kind of curious with that because you seem, as you're talking about it, like you rolled right back in. But I know it may feel that way, but sometimes there's a little bit more to the story. So how was that for you?
My transition back, it wasn't noticeable to me. However, others around me noticed some changes, some differences that I had, started with anger and unfortunate drinking and things to that nature, just to kind of whatever. And the biggest challenge I think a lot of service members have, and it's even not having been deployed, but just being at their garrison environment. When they come home on leave, they try and reinsert themselves right where they left off. But, they come to find that people had to begin to, live their lives without them present. And so there is that hard reality that, things have changed a little bit and you need to kind of figure out where you fit in now and not try and just restart everything back over as if, you never left. So there were some challenges like that, and trying to figure out, what do I need to do? Why do I act like this? And, as I go through my retirement process and I start to kind of talk about people, I get to dwell a little bit, I get to try and figure out like why things are, I conduct myself in certain ways. And so it was a challenge coming back, and it took a little while to kind of get back into normal, what would be normal patterns for what I was doing prior to leaving. But, there are hard adjustments that need to be made quickly so that you can get back to being productive with your life.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I appreciate you saying that. And there's a whole bunch, like I said, it's a whole show worthy of another conversation. So, but I appreciate you sharing that, and very similar to the kind of things, and everybody's a little bit different because everybody's going back into different family situations or different whatever. And you stayed in the military. And so that's at least, kind of the uniformity as far as that goes, but there's still some of those other transitions. So, well, we appreciate that. So, so we were going to, and then I guess, I get, the one thing I did want to ask you though, is you were growing up in Chicago and then California with Andy before we hand Andy the reins here. We're always really curious about how our immediate family kind of shaped us and core lessons learned in your family. So I think you're one of 4 kids.
2.
With 2. Okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
all right. You're the 4. Okay. Got it. That's what that knew. Okay. Then, so just growing up and then as you graduated and then as you're entering the military, looking back, what were some of the core formational lessons or values that you took from your kind of growing up with Andy and the fam there? What kind of things? I know he's on, so you can't really can't get after his ass too bad, but
half-ass. He can get a half-ass.
Half-ass.
There you go.
So what were a couple things that maybe you took with you into the military, that you felt like shaped you?
My dad, and he carries it on today as he has retired from corporate world. I think he's more busy now than he has ever been with his volunteerism or his volunteering. And he did that even when growing up in high school. He was the head he actually stood up and started the Boosters Club at Cupertino High School. And he also was, he was on the sideline doing all the stats for the football games. I may have had more tackles because my dad was keeping those tick marks, but it was him volunteering. And when I got into the military, it helped me in the fact that, you all of a sudden hear that audible call, I need 2, which means I need 2 soldiers to come and take care of this right now. And just from that, I just learned to raise my hand and let's go, I'll take care of this. And so just that volunteering, being willing to help out where it's necessary and needed. That's really what one of the biggest things I took from it. and it's helped me and it's carried me very far in my career.
Well,
Bruce, if I can brag on him for a minute myself, I'll give you three things that I think, and this is where I just jump up and down in excitement for him being in the military. The first one was going down to Fort Benning for his boot camp graduation. And they're having a large event in the dining hall. And his other grandfather, not my dad, but his mom's dad, also served. He walked with Patton across Europe in World War II. And they're calling out 4 names of individuals who have distinguished themselves and are getting a bump in grade immediately. And Curt was one of them. And I think it's one of that is the evidence of willing to go and do the stuff and take on leadership. But he told me one of the things that had shocked him out there was just to be with people who had grown up in such different circumstances than him. Right. And he probably never appreciated what he did have until he was in such a mixture of people from across the country. And that gave him some eye-opening moments. Another one is he called himself out earlier about his education. He's been taking courses in the military and in college. And at one point, after getting A's, he was asked, "Why don't you become a teacher?" And so, and then one day I asked him, "What kind of sergeant are you? Are you in their face growling?" He goes, "No, I just nag them to death." Mm-hmm. So, the transition of a young man at 19, not knowing where he wanted to go, to a polished, articulate person who is going to go out and now conquer something in the corporate world, it's been fun to watch.
That's pretty cool. So, well, and I just want to highlight on the disparity or very, the differences in people's background. I think, working within MVP, their kind of stat is somewhere between 35 and 40% of the folks entering the military already have PTSD because of their family kind of or non-family situation. And so it really is, it is a mix that I think if you came in from a family that, I don't want to call it normal, but whatever that normal is, but with some of those other kind of positives, it is hard to appreciate until you really meet people who have gone through other experiences. And there's a lot of folks in that kind of category, which makes it even more complex about what happens to them in the military, and particularly if they're deployed. And then when they come back and they're out of the military, they got to go way back and take care of some things that probably never got taken care of. And so that's certainly a disparity there. So, okay, well, I'm going to do a little summary on Ed just to get us started. So I categorize this, and then Andy, I'm going to let you run with it. Okay. So you fill in whatever gaps, and then Curtis too, I guess, if we're talking about it, to the extent you have memories of Ed as it relates to maybe some of his service and that would be really enriching, I think, as well. So I've got this called Journey from Mount Pleasant to North Africa and Italy. So that's kind of the scope we got. So born in New London, Iowa, then they moved into Mount Pleasant. Dad took over the family feed and grain business, so you can kind of give us all that. And then graduated U of I, 1941 accounting. I talked about that. And then started law school. And then Pearl Harbor hit December 7, 1941. Obviously changed the trajectory of everybody's lives there. Drafted Army and found out he could type and take shorthand and all that. And then you had it down as kind of a little bit like Radar in the MASH show, Radar O'Reilly, I believe it was. So turned into a clerk. And they had deployments to North Africa. And then when the front moved over into Italy, it was there. So what I have is second wave in 1942 as part of the MASH unit with Operation Torch. And that, I believe, was into North Africa as he began. Then the front moved to Italy and transferred over there by Naples and was there for the remainder, and then ended as a master sergeant. So why don't we we'll nip it there. And I guess the only other kind of related piece in there, you guys had some stuff in there about letters to Cora, and I think over a couple hundred, right? Over 300 letters that kind of details his day-to-day life. So why don't you take us from what you remember from New London or Mount Pleasant, and then run us through that story a little bit?
Sure. Well, I think both of you are familiar with Henry County, Iowa. That's the center of the universe for Ed's family. In fact, you could classify them as a pioneering family. If you go back 2 generations before him, all of his ancestors were in Henry County by 1842. And that's very early in Iowa history. And they all were in the farming business, some up by Winfield, some over by Wayland.
So, Curt, just so my wife and Pat's wife, Jenna and Jan, they're sisters. So they're in Canaan Township, and then their most immediate town, they're just about, 2 miles west, 2 miles west of Mount Union. And they all went to Winfield Mount Union High School. So all 10 daughters are right out of there. So Bub, that's her dad's name. I think he farmed 180 acres, I think it was, through that whole time. They still have the farmstead. And Jan's mom, she turns 100 in January, and she's still on the homestead there, just outside of Mount Union. So anyway, just a lot of so we've been down to Henry, and Pat, his history in Henry County. Oh, yeah. I've been a visitor. I've never really lived, but Pat has that experience. So anyway, okay, so a lot of overlap there.
Yeah. So and his grandfather started the feed and grain business in New London, A.D. Hayes Company. He had a big elevator there, and then ended up having 17 elevators around Southeast Iowa over the years. And started their family in New London. Columbus is my grandfather. He was the oldest of the family. Columbus himself actually was a fraternity brother of George Hallis at the University of Illinois. Wow. So there is a reason why the Bears hats come on our hats and heads every once in a while. Yeah.
We were all Bears living in Iowa, man. We were all Chicago. My dad was a Viking, but we were all Chicago Bear fans.
Well, it depended on when you formed it,
Yeah, right.
Same thing with baseball. It was Chicago or St. Louis. I mean, it was just the way it was. And Dad was born in 1920. And about 7 years later, there was concerns about financial irregularities at the elevator in Mount Pleasant, and so his dad and my uncle Ernie, our great uncle Ernie, were sent over there to kind of take on ownership, and over time they straightened it out. And the Depression hit, and the farm business was absolutely devastated in the Depression. And everybody, but at the same time, people could live off the farm if they could keep it. And the business ended up being more of a barter system for many years. And so Dad remembers a relatively wasn't devastated by the Depression, but they lived below what had been before. At the same time, he was successful, graduated second from his class in Mount Pleasant High School in 1937, and headed up to Iowa City to start his bachelor's degree, and got a degree in accounting. And as you noted before, finished in his bachelor's degree in 1941 summer, and decided to start law school, which was disrupted by Pearl Harbor and him getting drafted through the Henry County draft board. While he was in Iowa City, he had met Curtis, my mom, and they had dated on and off for a while, broke it off, and by the time he headed overseas, he at one point writes in a self-autobiography, "I finally got her out of my system."
But apparently not.
Lying to himself.
Yeah.
I actually hope he must
have to.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the train, and travel in those days was by train. And so they got on a train down to Little Rock and walked off the train. And as you came off the train, you were told to go in line 1 or line 2. It was totally random. But he ended up in a MASH unit line, medical court line. And after a little while, they figured out that he actually had some talents, and he knew how to take shorthand. He knew how to type. and so he was the perfect kind of person to be able to do paperwork, which in those days, everything was pencil and paper. And so that was important. After Pearl Harbor, as many of us who know history, there was a big push that we had to do something to hit back. And the first thing was the Doolittle raid on Tokyo. But after that, the pressure was to do something to get into Europe, and Operation Torch into North Africa was the push. So he was out of, I believe the port they came out of for the military was Roanoke, and headed overseas, and were on boats waiting for the landing. And then they went on shore in the second wave to set up hospital units and take care of things. They were whereas there is some action that happened in Africa later on, the Desert Fox and things like that. The original North Africa landings were fairly easy, and they didn't have that much action in the MASH unit. Eventually, they were able to clear out North Africa, and then at that time is when the move was made over to land in the south of Naples in Italy. And after some brutal time there, they then started to move other support units over, including the MASH unit. And they ended up taking over a hospital just outside of Naples. Somewhere in that period, Ed and Cora started corresponding. And it started with just, "Hi, how are you?" letters. But within about 3 months, they were writing back and forth 2 or 3 letters a week, going through the censors. And in those letters, I get an amazing sense of what his days were like. By this time, he had been promoted to a sergeant, and he was the radar O'Reilly equivalent of that MASH unit. But in addition to having to do a lot of the paperwork and everything, he was also the one spinning the records and putting the movies on for the soldiers and the patients. And it's fun to read some of the music that he loved, and on the records, and the big band is that time, and so you get a real sense for that. One of the things that strikes me that I think very few people appreciate is on the day he got on that train in Mount Pleasant and went to Little Rock, he didn't know when he was going to come back. There was not a 2-year enlistment. It was basically for the duration. And I believe there's one picture of him in uniform at Mount Pleasant with family that might have been before he deployed to Africa. But after they took that boat over to Africa, it was 4 years before he came back. And that's in his early 20s. So I look at one time. I looked at him as having a wonderful career, and I realized at one point he didn't actually start as a professor of law until he was 28. Because so much of this other stuff got and took over their lives, and yet it's service that everything I can tell, he was more than happy to. His brother was in the radio expert in electronics. His sisters were, one of them, Martha, was too young, so she was not, she was still in high school, but the other one was supporting the effort. The family was supporting the effort. It's and I think we, especially at a town like Mount Pleasant, where it would have been just every family and every farm family around and throughout the county had people there. If you go to the courthouse in Mount Pleasant, they have now a honor court with plaques on the walls there for all the people that have served and those that have died. And there were members of that community that didn't come home, so they went away not knowing when they would come home, and they didn't come home the way others thought. So I don't think we appreciate just how much sacrifice was made, yet it was for a common cause. I think everybody, not everybody, but across the country, it was a righteous fight. It was an important fight, and because we had been attacked at Pearl Harbor, it made it even more personal, I think, than if that hadn't happened.
Yeah, just one interjection there. So my father-in-law, Jen, and Jenna's dad, right there, the farmer. So he and all his buddies, when this all went down, because he's about the same age as Ed would have been. He went and his buddies got accepted and all went off to fight, but he got, what do they call it, 4F'd or whatever, he failed the physical because they said his feet were jacked up and too flat or something like that. And it's, it's really an interesting kind of, because he was a big hulking, he was an All-American football player, ran and did basketball, saw, everything you could imagine. And so to get physically excluded from the military,
right.
It was a pretty bizarre, I still don't quite understand how that happened. But in fact, you've been around him more than I have, but I just, on the one hand, of those who went to serve, and then so from that moment on, and he was never a big drinker, but when his buddies all left, he took a vow of sobriety in honor of them. And honestly, he never drank again the rest of his life as a commitment to the guys who went. And I always felt like this deep kind of woundedness within Bub. And Pat, you could, again, you've talked to him probably more than I have about that, but this sense of not being able to go, not because, like you said, it was a righteous, it was a war to protect freedom, a war to protect our country. And to get bounced like that in a little bit, I feel like he grieved that for a really long time in his life. So I just think it's kind of, that not going in a way, was a painful thing for him. I don't know, Pat, what did you think of that?
Yeah, we had discussions about McKinnon.
Yeah, right.
And out fighting in the infantry and, that type of thing. And it pained him deeply.
Yeah. For
years, probably for the rest of his life, just that he was sent home. And it may have had something to do with they knew they had to produce food. And, you know what I mean? Being the only son and a farmer, and I remember trying to explain to him, Bub, you were feeding America. You worked from sun up to sundown every day while these other people were fighting the Japanese. Somebody had to still feed America, feed the soldiers, feed the, there's so many different levels to strategic warfare that I tried to explain to him he was part of the effort, but he didn't want to hear it.
Yeah, it was tough for him.
He was hurt.
Yeah. Okay. So I just, so that's another kind of parallel track that we had, with Ed and Bub, I think, very similar ages and would have been in their 20s when this whole thing went down and that. So anyway, okay. So he's off. So go ahead, Andy. Appreciate it. It's great. So
so go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So, and so it's interesting reading some of the letters and the stuff that was in it. Obviously there were things that were going on in the local area, and there were activities that the military did to try and help with morale. There were local Italian opera companies that would come and perform for the troops. And my mom was a classical music undergraduate at Iowa, and so Dad had appreciated that, and so the letters had comments from Dad about the music, and it was part of his wooing from a distance of showing interest in the things my mom took. He was a smart guy, and by the but it also talked about some of the things in the impoverishment around them in the Italian communities. He would talk about going out and taking a walk for 3 hours in the countryside and what he saw. And a lot of us don't realize just how devastated the areas were. My wife is from France, and her family's home was taken over by the Nazis as a local headquarters, and her mother had to live in the barn when she was age 15 for the duration of the war. We don't feel that the war was not here, but the war was here. But in a very different way. There were also letters he wrote to his mom and dad in very different tenor. He had a very strained relationship with his mom, I think, would be at that time, but his dad was his buddy. And so there was also some planning of what would happen afterwards. I think a lot of people don't realize at the end of the war, they couldn't bring everybody back immediately. And so they had a point system. And so now, starting in May of 1945, what your point count became the focus of the guys, because it was when you got to a certain level, and the men that were in combat had higher points per month served than those that weren't. And so he knew it was possible it would be well into 1946 before he would have space on a boat. Luckily, things moved forward faster, and he got back stateside and by Thanksgiving time, 1945. But that's still, 5 months later, and we don't realize, just how much that extra separation was. But he realized it was a equitable system, and it was a system. And he was someone who said, look, if you have a system and play by it, that's fine. I'll live with it. When he got back, he went back up to Iowa City and restarted going to law school. And Cora by that time had graduated and was teaching in music in Maquoketa, and then and her dad passed away, and so she ended up moving down to St. Louis to help her mom at that time. But they had reconnected. They were well connected, and so they started. One would take a train to St. Louis, the other would take a train to Iowa City, so they could, spend weekends together. Very chaste, very appropriate for that time frame. And at one point, they stopped in Mount Pleasant so Mom could meet her future in-laws, and they got married in the end of '46. They loved New York City. Dad did did a postgraduate law degree at Columbia after they were married, and they lived there. And Mom sang professionally as well as worked. And so it became a wonderful town. But while he was there, he, through connections, the dean at the University of Iowa connected him with the dean at Drake. And over the phone, he got offered an associate professorship at the law school at Drake. And they moved to Iowa. Back to Iowa and back to Des Moines. He wasn't sure that would ever be where he would do, but it turned out to be the move. And for the next,
well, let me
go ahead.
Well, I just want to, because there's some other legal stuff. I just want to drop this in, and for non-lawyers, it probably doesn't mean anything, but it's a pretty cool story. So if people are listening, so when he came back to Iowa, so when he graduated with honors. So typically means you're in the top 10% of your class. He was a member of the board of editors of the Iowa Law Review, which then is a very competitive process and still is, and that's a big deal. He was a research assistant to Dean Mason Ladd. And so Dean Ladd is like, he's a hero in the Iowa Law School, legendary, because he's one of the premier folks that guided the law school for decades and all that. So to be an RA selected by the dean is already a pretty big honor. And then he was elected to the Order of the Coif, which actually I'm a Coif member myself, so stumbled through that somehow. And the Order of the Coif is kind of it's a little dropping on top of the graduating with honors. So it's kind of a select, but it is inclusive of grades, but it is also kind of, participation, engagement, and service to the law school community while you're there. And so, so he'd already, that's just his law school career, you know what I mean? So, but he's already kind of obviously a smart guy, came back, but very committed to the law school and kind of working those things. Then he got his LLM degree at Columbia, like you said. And then it's also just, I just want to point it out. You mentioned this, but for Dean Ladd to know, and so the person that was retiring from Drake was the dean, and that was the person that did kind of business tax and all that kind of stuff. So they needed somebody to replace that person when they left. So the new appointed dean, Dean Tolfelson, was friends with his competitor at Iowa, Dean Ladd. And so Ladd called him and said, hey, I had this research assistant, just got his LLM in taxation. He's a whiz kid. Why don't you hire him? So for Dean Ladd to go to that extent as well, I just think really speaks highly of Ed, his already kind of his work ethic, his career, the way he handled himself and all that. And I think we're going to learn more about that as he gets back to Iowa and gets to the Drake Law School. But I mean, it's still, he really distinguished himself there and set himself up by doing so to pick up this position to teach at Drake University. So anyway, I just wanted to fill in a little of those pieces.
Thank you.
Those are all really, I think, really distinguishing elements on behalf of Ed. And I think it really, like I said, it sets the foundation for what happened later in his career.
And thank you very much. You have much more hog perspective, I think, on those elements. I will tell you that he told the story that when he got to Des Moines, Tollefson said, I can't let you teach tax because I never have seen you done anything in tax. Yes, you're an accountant. Yes, you're all these things. You can teach business, but I can't let you touch tax. 2 years later, the Iowa legislature rewrote the tax code, and Dad was the primary author. And afterwards, Tollefson said, "Okay, you can teach tax now."
Right. Well, he said, yeah, because that's one of the other things. So eventually, after he got there, within the first 5 years, the Iowa government calls him. They put him on the Iowa Tax Commission as an advisor on the tax issues, and then they completely rewrite all the tax. So there's the code, and then there's all the regulations that explain what the legislature meant by the code, and try to do that. And so he was the prime author with about 2 other people that rewrote the entire Iowa tax code. And so he still hadn't really practiced, but apparently the dean at the time said, well, I guess if you wrote the law, you might understand it. So you could go ahead and teach it, I guess. So, but anyway, but to be appointed to that commission is still a pretty big deal as well. Yeah. So, and then to have his role, so he already has his kind of fingers around, and he's already influenced significantly the entire state of Iowa because, the way he rewrote the code and was involved at that level. I mean, his impact in Iowa is just massive, for that time period. So really cool that way too. So, okay. All right.
Another aspect on his return is he stayed in the Army Reserve.
Yeah.
And now that he had his law degree, he moved from being a non-commissioned officer to an officer. So, you've got this window between 48 and 50 in which he's starting to learn the ropes and teaching. And in Iowa, he had developed a love for the Socratic method of teaching. I contend he also was a Socratic parent. Mm. So,
well, so for those who are not familiar with the Socratic method, based on Socrates, and Socrates' kind of methodology for working with his pupils at the time, and this is classic law school stuff. It's probably evolved a little bit, but basically you better be really prepared because the professor kind of goes over a couple concepts and then just calls on people. And it is one-on-one, typically for 20, 30, or 45 minutes, reviewing the nuances of the lessons for the day, what's going on. And it really goes beyond that. It's like forcing the student on their feet in front of all their peers in a public format like that to express themselves and come up with theories, talk about the values and ethics and all that kind of stuff. And so the Socratic method certainly has its benefits. Of course, there's a lot of people that were just scared shitless of it, because it ain't friendly. You get over your own shit pretty quickly and that kind of stuff. But I can see your dad doing that, particularly, with his military background and being a clerk and analytical and all that kind of stuff. And so certainly fits in that way. So, all right, just wanted to kind of give everybody an idea what that meant. So, but I know he was well loved though by his students. And
and I've actually, some of my high school classmates who went to law school there, I've gotten stories from them that I would never have gotten on my own.
Yeah.
And if I'd gone to law school there and sat in his class, I probably wouldn't have been able to get them either because we would have had a different situation at that time. So in this 2-year period, 48 to 50, he's also, his Radar O'Reilly capabilities kick back in. There's another member on the faculty who is brilliant and writes a lot of articles, but has the worst handwriting. And the secretaries at this school can't read his handwriting. Well, it turns out Dad could. So Dad ended up not only doing his own work, but he would type up Dick's stuff too. It's an unsighted supporter of the output is a kind of a classic part of his period there. As we all know from history, Korean War broke out, and there was a need to remobilize a lot of people. And so in 1950, Dad was recalled by the Army. At this point, they needed legal help in procurement. And so he was first passed through Michigan, but then on to New York City. And he had, I'm told the story that he had one moment of leave to come back to Des Moines. And about 3 months later, a mom wrote a letter to him to say that I was on the way. So it's fascinating to see something like that about your initial history in life too. She eventually joined him out there, and they lived in Levittown, and for 2 years. And so I was born actually in New York City because of that translocation. But they have great stories about that period out there too. And one day they got a babysitter, and they're wandering down the streets of New York City, and they bump into an Army buddy of his from Italy. So it's just, in a town of 3 million people, 2 people happen to just walk by each other on the street in New York City. He came back. He stayed in the reserve for another 7 years after Korea, and rose to be a major in that. Also, though, did some city attorney work for a couple of the suburbs of Des Moines. Was involved, as you noted before, on a lot of various state legislative and government agencies, but also things that were related to the profession of law in the state. And I had great relationships, as far as I could tell, with all the faculty over in Iowa City. There are many people who always saw Drake as a secondary law school compared to Iowa City, and it was more expensive. So there were people who wanted to try and create scholarships for the students at Drake that could help shorten or make it so it wasn't such a big gap. And a guy named Leland Forrest, who was on faculty when Dad got there, was one of those. And so he set up a scholarship that was purposely made for in-state students to be able to help them. And Dad himself, with my mom, has set up a scholarship focused on out-of-state students to help them bridge their tuition gaps coming to study in law in Des Moines.
Let me just one more thing on it, because when he came back after the Korean War, he did the basic and the advanced courses as a judge advocate in the military, which is kind of the process of dealing with military justice issues and all that. And so he was involved in that as a judge at times. And so I thought that was pretty cool with the U.S. Army Reserve. And then, like you said, stayed in until 1960 with the rank of major. So I've got about a 10-point list of all this stuff at Drake. So tell me when you want me to review some of that, because I'll be glad to. Because he was there for his whole career, and he did some really, really amazing things, some of which we've talked about and some we haven't yet. But I'll let you go on for a little bit here, and then I'll summarize some of the other.
Sure. It's interesting. One of the times, and I was very young at this point. It was when I was 6 years old. He took a year and taught at Vanderbilt, and so we all moved down to Nashville. And every weekend we were out traveling around the state of Tennessee, looking at and every memorial plaque along the street road got stopped at. And Dad was a historian and a buff, and he loved stuff, and he loved the railroads. But in Tennessee, I got a glimpse a little bit of his military, because we would stop. A lot of those were Civil War places, and he would talk about a little bit what it was like on the front lines and how different that war was than when we got to World War II. Mind you, I'm 6, so this is it's ancient history in my mind, but he did talk about it some, and then that's different than a lot of combat or military. I think the combat ones especially are much less willing to share it. And part of it is, as Curt touched on earlier, their experiences and their changes are different. And they realize that others may not relate to what they are feeling. Besides those things, he was involved in community, very active in church. Mom and Dad was too. Was involved in was an umpire in for the Little League, so that we could play our games. He was very fair. I was safe. I really was safe.
Right. just like Curtis made all those tackles.
I'll tell you.
There you go.
I'll share with this. My dad was also an umpire in one game, and he rung me up, and that pitch was still outside.
I was an umpire only because nobody else showed up to do it. So, but yes, it's interesting that I also, after every high school football game, called in the blurb to the San Jose Mercury News, and he got mentioned a couple times. Yeah,
well, there you go. Well,
when you get 2 interceptions and 7 tackles, you probably should, get it mentioned. So, he was a recruiter. Drake had a need to get out and try and attract talent from lots of places, and he ended up volunteering to go out on the road and visit the small colleges throughout the Illinois, Indiana area. And every fall he would be out there and set up a table at career days. But he did it for another reason. He also was the genealogist of our family, and so this allowed him to visit lots of historic family root places, and that he could go look and chomp and go into courthouses and look up records. And so he was using that. He was double dipping on Drake's dime those days.
All right.
Good for him.
Yeah. Good. Well, let me just run through a few of these things. If it triggers any kind of stories, we'd love to hear it. But let me, 1948 through 1990, roughly, I think, was his retirement. So he's published 26 articles in the Drake Law Review, plus another 10 or so more in other different law reviews nationally. Authored one of the major books and very well respected in its day on Iowa corporate law. We already talked about sitting on the Iowa Tax Commission and rewriting the Iowa Code. He authored the corporate law and practice for West Iowa Practice. So for people who don't know what law school is, so West, big publishing house, and they always, did back in the day when we had books, all the cases were put together, and West published, all the federal law, all the state laws and all that. And then in addition to that, what they did is they would continually update the case law. So as judges were interpreting the law in each state, they had the Iowa practice. So West published those in every single state, and they had to have authors from those states write the originals, and then they would do updated supplements on how the law has changed or interpreted those. And so those were like pocket additives. Anyway, so your dad rewrote those and it was one of the major ones for 2 of the huge volumes in 1969, and then kept all the supplements up until basically toward the end of his career. With the Iowa State Bar, he had a huge role, very active in their tax and business committees, and kept that whole thing moving with all the lawyers. We already talked about his Socratic method, very demanding with high expectations. But he was known, even with the Socratic method, though, I think a little bit, we talked about it with Curtis, what kind of sergeant are you? Maybe more of a nagger, but one of affirmation and support and encouragement, but still holding people accountable in a real demonstrative way. So pretty cool that way. I think he's most known, at least in reading all this stuff, deep and strong commitment to the health and betterment of the entire Drake Law School community. So acting dean from 67 to 68, associate dean from 1973 through 1986. So all kinds of stuff with that. Served with distinction and unbelievable loyalty. Supported and developed the Drake Law Review. Is really thought of as one of the core founders of the Drake Law Review and getting it to be, the well-established and respected law review journal that it is. And so that's pretty cool, which takes lots and lots of times. Actively engaged in Iowa national law and civic organizations. So there's just a litany of national bar association type things that he was involved in and helped. And then, as you mentioned, he and Cora endowed the Edward R. and Cora Hayes Endowed Scholarship for folks coming in from out of state. And then after retirement, traveled extensively and volunteered at the State Historical Library. So you already kind of talked about that. And then later, he was presented in 2001 with the Drake Medal for significant and sustained service to the university community. So that's similar to having an honorary degree bestowed upon you at that time. So let me close with this. I'll just read a quote that was kind of in there, and I think it really I thought just a short piece, but it kind of really summarizes, I think, a lot of what Ed stood. So understanding the character of Ed Hayes and recognizing the contributions he has made to the law school, and one has to remember not only his teaching and his scholarship, but also his willingness to do whatever the law school needed to have done. If that was recruiting, if that was preparing the semester schedule, if that was typing a colleague's handwritten articles, if that was serving in the numerous ways that he did for the university at large, in short, if there was work to be done, Ed Hayes could be counted on to do it. And so it really was one of engagement and service and constant commitment. And so, anyway, I'll let you kind of respond to a little bit of those pieces, but it's really I guess I called it a life well lived, in service and engagement and sacrifice. And so anyway, I'll let you kind of fill in any gaps in there if you want to, or if we'd left some stuff out, that'd be great.
Well, the background on that is the law review article that David Walker wrote on Dad. I found out after the fact that Dad helped ghostwrite part of it, so it may have good shine on it too.
That seems like that's a Hayes kind of trait there, just to kind of stand behind the thing and kind of make sure it sounds right. But it's all good.
The winners should write history. That's
there you go.
The old saw. I'll actually touch on a couple of personal things, and you commented he volunteered, and after he retired, he would be over at the library or working in the food pantry. And it was interesting at his funeral. We invited several people to get up and make short eulogy moments, and one of them was the lady who ran the food pantry, and she said it wasn't until he died and I read his obituary that I realized that this humble man who would sweep the floors in the food closet was a distinguished professor. It was just, that was him. He didn't look for the limelight. He didn't look for the shine. I will also tell you that he and my mom are quite different temperaments, and that's oftentimes good for a marriage. She wanted to travel all over the world, and so he would go with her. And when they would get back, I'd have a phone call to talk about the trip, and they'd both be on the call, and Mom would be talking about what they did here and here and here and here. I asked her what her favorite place was, and she'd always name some place on the trip. And I'd always ask Dad, what was your favorite place? And he says, Des Moines. Getting home was always, finally he was back where he wanted to be. He was on Iowa sod once more.
Me too.
Yeah. He's an educator, and he came from a family of educators. His mom taught school. One of his sisters taught and then worked for publishing companies. Another thing on the West Publishing, one of the principals at West is a Drake Law grad. And so Drake always had this wonderful relationship with West. And when West wanted to computerize and go online with Drake's library, was the beta site and has always been at the front edge. And so they have probably one of an admirable online electronic system for the students in the state as a resource. And it's just a great relationship and I think part of that is probably the relationships built when Dad was part of the faculty there.
Well, let me just bounce. So kind of getting his story out there. And again, you guys can kind of chime in as we go. So again, we got a great career of commitment, loyalty, service, and engagement. So I guess, and Curtis, just wondering, so, you kind of grew up underneath the shadows of some of this stuff as a kid and all that kind of thing. But for both of you, I guess there are kind of two questions is, how did you see Ed and Cora's life impacting others? And then just personally, how did the way in which they carried themselves and the way they lived, how did that impact the two of you? I mean, obviously father and son, and so there's some overlap there, but at the same time, kind of interpreting those lives, and grandparents, I think for grandchildren are always a little bit, it's a unique interpretation at times about who they are. But, as you guys were at least there for a while until you moved to California. So, what kind of impact did you see him leaving on others, and how did they impact you guys? What lessons did you take?
Curtis, go ahead.
They were present. I'll give it that. They were always, if there was something going on, they were present. They were there. They always had their little 35 millimeter camera ready to take a picture and shoot. But if there was a major event going on, they were at my graduation from basic training. They were always there. And as my dad pointed out, my grandpa was, he wasn't outgoing and brash and just, very vocal. He was a very quiet, silent individual, but extremely intelligent. And he was gathering data all the time. I think that's what he was doing. And I've kind of taken some of that is instead of just going off the hip, gather data first and then analyze that in order to come up with the right answers. And that's the way I've really taken away from him in the way in which he conducted himself. So
that's a pretty good lesson. I think people learning how to listen and not have to be in the limelight and kind of assess things, and then be willing to fit in where there's need, to some extent can be considered to be a lost talent, I think. But anyway, but having the willingness and having the heart to listen is a pretty big deal. So that's a great lesson. So Andy, how about you?
Well, I'll use the word tolerant. And my older brother was, I don't know what your experiences were in high school, but I was the one who would come into class. Oh, you're Michael's younger brother. It was like, oh God, there's an expectation I'm not sure I want to live up to. And he graduated top honors at Iowa, and then went on to Harvard Law School. I think he regrets that, but he did it. But I was one who plotted, and some people have the 4-year plan for college and others the 5. Mine was the 10-year plan. And yet they were there behind me the whole time. And part of it was simply I went to Drake for a couple of years because it was free. And that was probably a mistake. I played baseball, and they dropped the baseball program the second year I was there. Not because of my talent, but
okay. I was going to ask about that.
No correlation there. Then I moved over to Iowa City, and I started working at the hospital, and I fell in love with medicine. Now my grades at Drake had made sure I'd never get into med school, but it allowed me. I found ways, and I ended up finding a path there, and eventually went back to get my own undergraduate degree as a physician's assistant. But all through that time, not once did I get a negative from my dad. He was there to support. He knew the path. There was lots of time. There was lots of opportunity, and I think he saw talent. I think he also, with all of his grandchildren that he got to know before he passed, he recognized their individual talents, and he had great hopes that they would emerge. And I think if he could come back and walk around and see where Curtis is these days, he'd be beaming at what the man has become.
Well, in that one, I just want to, the recognition that, everybody has to walk their path, and you have to find your own to some extent. And for some people, first one they take, they run with it, and it all works out great, and it's beautiful and all that kind of stuff. And it looks, but it just works out. And then for others, some of the paths we take don't necessarily open to the fields that we're looking for. And so then you've got to reroute and it takes a little bit longer, but it doesn't mean people aren't on the path. And having a parent and support people that have enough grace and forgiveness with you and love to support you in your journey, even though it looks different than theirs and takes longer and maybe looks a little bit more chaotic. It's amazing what a gift that is to people. So not being forced into a box just because your dad did it a certain way or your mom did it a certain way, having to do the same thing. So that's a great attribute and certainly a testament to him. Well,
with that, then I'm glad my dad has paid that forward because he's been that same individual with me. Lord knows he's gotten those calls where it's like, man, I messed up, and he's there to soak it in and then figure out that positive spin on it, on what to go and how about to go and do it. So when I was deployed, every time I've been deployed, he's been my number one champion out there, my number one fan, sending me packages, letters, things to that nature. And I'll connect my grandfather and my deployments. Number one, I'm thankful for the advancements in aviation that I got to fly to my deployments as opposed to taking a boat, because that would have sucked. But number two, mail call is so important. And although technology has advanced so far that emails are fast and efficient, I'll tell you that a letter it changes everything, and it's more personal, and it definitely helps out with that individual. So anyone that's listening, if you have someone that's deployed, send them a letter as opposed to an email. That it will change. It just is more coveted, if you will.
Okay.
Hey, can I chime in on that?
Yeah, okay.
You cannot reach in the front breast pocket of your BDUs and pull out an email from your grandma, from your wife, from your children. You can be laying in the dirt, all hell's busting loose, and there's a letter in that front breast pocket. So take that to heart. Please send correspondence. Take the time, write a note, mail it. Thanks, Sergeant Major. That's very impactful, meaningful.
Cool.
Well, let me ask this then. So just kind of thinking about Ed and the things we've been talking about. So I guess I had kind of two just there, and you can go either way with it. So on the one hand, I guess if we're sitting here and Ed was with us, what might he suggest for us to think about as we remember Pearl Harbor and, where that took us? And then I guess also just with Ed's spirit amongst us in that way, as we're looking toward the future and kind of given where culture and society is on that, what might Ed encourage us to do at this point? So, and you don't have to answer both, but just kind of those are things that what I'm thinking about, just, lessons from the past about people who had wisdom and were patient and committed and dedicated, I think offer a lot to us. So where might Ed lead us if we're thinking about Pearl Harbor and or the future of our country?
I can relate a little bit on that. As I mentioned before, he went to serve at a time where it was the expectation. And while one of the things that at one point, he was the faculty president at Drake. And this was in the height of 68, 69 in the Vietnam conflict. And I was actually in the dorms over there one night when somebody put a bomb beside the biology department and blew a hole in one of the buildings. And so I called him and he came over. And, he was pragmatic about those things. He recognized both sides. He was not dogmatic that, that everything that was talked about in Vietnam was right or wrong. He was central in his political thoughts, probably a little right of center, but not too far. But I think he would look at, there is reason to interact with people, as Curtis talked about earlier, gather data, integrate, think. And he wasn't a slogan man. He was more of a, pragmatic guy. And I think he would hope that, this would continue. I think he would believe that the country we have and the direction it has had for over 200 years is one, it's an experiment, but it's a good experiment. And I think he would be quite supportive of it going forward.
Okay. Curtis, anything you want to add or?
My memories of growing up with him was, like I said, he was very quiet. Grandma was the one that was very talkative. She wrote the letters and let me know what the weather patterns are wherever she was at that moment in time. The things I've taken from him and that I've been able to observe have kind of carried over into my dad and his volunteerism and the things that they do and he does. Those are the things I take away. Is basically look out for everyone else. It's not about you as an individual. It's about the group as a whole, which is it's steeped in the military. I mean, teamwork. There is no individuals. Everything has got to be about a team, and that's why. I think I was good in sports is because, and that's where my foundations of teamwork started, and it just got better and more enhanced in the military.
Okay. Pat, you want to chime in on any of that stuff? Or, I mean, I know, you've been listening. So just wondering.
Yeah, I've tried to keep my mouth shut. Thank you so much for sharing your stories. Very impactful. Again, back to make sure you're writing letters. Just a short note, that type of stuff, because there's nothing worse than mail call and you don't get anything. You know what I mean? Because you need to know people are thinking of you and stay connected and those type of things. At the same time, any service member that's listening, you can cut out that card off your MRE box and throw it on the helicopter, and it'll get to where it's going. So it's a two-way street. You want mail, you got to write mail. Mm-hmm. I remember my freshman year in the dorms, I was on the athlete floor, and they're all like, how come you get letters? What the hell? I'm like, listen, you morons, you have to write a letter to get a letter. You know what I mean? It's reciprocal, as so many things are in life. But again, thank you so much. And I'm going to do some research. Henry County guy, family grown up in Henry County, had farms, really east close of Mount Pleasant, kind of south, in the time period that you're talking about. Our family's probably intertwined at some point. You can't. One of the things I love about Iowa, Bruce, you say, hey, where are you from? Hey, so-and-so. And in an instant, yeah, other people. You know what I mean? It's just a tremendous story.
I'll give you a small world story of that just to bring it home. So my dad's youngest brother, Warren, has four children, and one of them is Chris. Chris is a 5 foot tall young lady in her 50s now, but an excellent golfer and works in the golf industry and lives in the Los Angeles area. And she is a member of the Wilshire Country Club and has won their championship a couple times. Recently, she was at a soiree for people wanting to become members at Wilshire. And she ends up, this one guy who they get connected because they're talking about the Chicago Cubs, which they both obviously loved. Yeah. But she couldn't understand how this guy it could be, because he had just moved from Singapore. He's American, but he just moved from Singapore. He says, well, before I was in Singapore, I came from a small town in Iowa. She goes, okay, what town? He goes, oh, Mount Pleasant. And she goes, so what do you think of the fifth hole of Henry County Country Club?
Yes.
And you probably have met several of my relatives. Martha Hayes was there, and it was my aunt. That's Ed's youngest sister. Ernie is my great uncle, and he was the mover and shaker in town.
You got to have New the Saints done.
Yes.
That's hey, you're connecting the lines for me. I do. Yeah. I know your family well.
Yeah.
Work with them closely.
Yeah.
Wow. So, another small world moment right here.
Yeah.
And the hidden pearl.
The hidden pearl. So let's get to that, because we've been going a while and I appreciate you guys' time. I guess I wanted to, particularly for Curtis, just because you're in that transition and we talk a lot with transitions and all that. So you are currently, you've moved out of overseeing the recruiting battalion in California, and you're kind of looking off in the future where that's going. And so right now you're with the Department of Defense. They have what they call the Skills Bridge with Hiring Our Heroes, which is kind of a mentoring program, as I understand it, that helps servicemen and women still remain in service, but yet be placed into different private settings to kind of like test things out to see what they might want to do afterwards while they're still having the support. So if you're okay with that, could you just give us a couple minutes? And if I botched it, clean it up for me, but tell us a little bit about what that is. Because I've met actually at a couple things. Actually, they were both in California. We were doing a couple events, and there were some service organizations there, and two different people with two different organizations were both military in that mentoring program. And so that was before you had told me about that. Mm-hmm. And both of them gave me really positive reviews on it, said it's been a lifesaver for them to be able to try stuff. But anyway, give us a little shout out on what you're doing now and what that program's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. The DoD Skills Bridge, it's a relatively new program that within the last 6 months of a service member's career, they're allowing them to go out and do an internship for up to 4 months within a corporate organization or within a business organization, so that they can get experience, real life experience, while still being paid by the military, in order to not go out cold and not just not depart the military without some practical knowledge of the because it is a hard transition. The way we talk in the military and the way that the corporate world talks, two different languages completely. So I've been doing that, and it's a great program. And any corporation, anyone out there that's listening that has the ability to take a look at this program, I highly encourage it. You're going to get a service member who is a team player, organized, disciplined, that will be there to kind of help out. And it's a win-win situation. You're going to help that soldier out, but you're also going to get good feedback and a good set of eyes back on what you're doing. I've been fortunate enough to do my internship through CBRE. That's the Coldwell Banker, Richard Ellis. Amazing organization, amazing company. They actually brought me in to help them with their maintenance tech apprenticeship program. This is basically continuing on with life, with providing lifetime opportunities for people within a similar target market age of the individuals enlisting into the military. It's looking to bring in people with minimal skills and get into the trades of maintenance tech apprenticeship. So they're going to teach them from the ground up HVAC, electrical, plumbing, and carpentry, so that they can begin a career as opposed to it's just a 9-to-5 job, and it's a job at that. It's an actual career path for them within CBRE. Another thing that they've asked me to help out with is their military recruitment, because they are huge on veteran recruiting. It's one of their DE&I initiatives, and it hits home with me because for the last 16 years I have been bringing people into the military, and so now I have a passion for when they get out of the military to help curb veteran homelessness. Because I think that's where a lot of the transition is. A lot of these individuals join 17, 18 years old, and they leave without a plan. And that's where companies like this program, the DoD Skills Bridge, kind of help with that. But CBRE, they're one of the top Fortune 100 companies that are doing veteran recruiting, and not just veterans, but also spouses of active duty service members, because that is a population that has a high unemployment or underemployment rate. And so that's another population base that is, they're willing to work. They want to work, but they're not always considered or thought about. And that's where CBRE has they're working to combat that and be a part of that. And I can't be more appreciative of my team that I came in with, which, Commander I'm under, she's a prior service Air Force. And one of my other team members is a prior infantry guy that went to Afghanistan. So we're out there, and the communication, I'm able to. It's an easier transition because they're like, we don't talk like that here. Right. We talk like this here. So it's been very helpful. But highly encourage any corporation out there to take a look at the DoD Skills Bridge, see how it applies or how they can apply it, so that they can help out veterans getting out of the service.
Okay, so let's and then Curt, will you send me any links that we need? So we'll have all those in the show notes. So we'll do that for how employers can kind of check into that. And if they have questions, send me stuff on your Instagram or however you want people to follow up. So just again, reminder out there to shout out. So hiring a vet, it's a little bit different. It's kind of like going to I don't want to dumb it down, but going to the rescue place and picking up a pup that's been in there. They got some history, but they can be absolutely amazing, and they need a little help with the transition and kind of figuring things out. Not all of them, but people do. And so, and I just, again, another shout out to, Emerging Vets and Players and MVP the movie with Nate Boyer. It's a pretty stark look at some of the issues veterans face on the way back, and some of their experiences, particularly around homelessness, and because homelessness without employment leads to a lot of very difficult transitional issues. So with that, so I appreciate that very much. So I'll have all the info in the notes. So we'd like to close out. I have one other question. So we always do a donation. So Curt and or Andy, you guys can talk if you know right now what you'd like to donate to. So we'll be glad. And if you want to split it, but shoot me a note on that. Or if you know what organization you'd like to support. Usually we do some kind of nonprofit out there in the world. So it could be a food bank or homeless shelter or whatever it is that you guys like, we'll be glad to do that donation. And we'll do that in Ed's honor and memory, if that's okay. And so you guys let me know about where you'd like that sent, and we'll take care of that. So that would be good. And then lastly, the Hidden Pearls is called Hidden Pearls because we're out on a search to find these hidden pearls, which we believe there is good in all folks. And there's a lot of people out there trying to do good, just like Ed spent his life. So just wondering, in this world, if you've come across anybody or an organization, and I know, Curt, you just talked about that, but what right now, as you're looking at the world and in your life, it gives you guys hope? Pat, you can start too, whatever. So like, what are the things kind of warm you up?
Yeah, what gives me hope is I retired out of the military, became a school administrator, superintendent. My last school, I had about 3,500 kids, and the healthy goodness inside of children, the healthy aspirations and desires to get out and do good things for humanity are overwhelming. A lot of people will say, people these days, this is going on, children. But much like Ed came back to Drake, did all these wonderful things, they're out there. Great kids growing up that are going to do great things for humanity. I always tried to tell people, strive to mitigate all these issues that cause social upheaval, those type of things. They're always going to be there, but never, ever give up. Always strive to make the world a better place. And the kids are doing that. We just need to sometimes get the hell out of their way, clear the path, and let them be the outstanding young people that they are, much like your father was and your grandfather, because they're there. That next generation of him is there. We just need to position them to do the great things that your father did.
Cool. All right. Thank you, Pat. Curt, Andy?
Go ahead, Ed.
Well, I'll start by saying if there's a world where there's an author that'll write a book with the title Rufus T. Johns, the best doggone watchdog this side of the Skunk River. I mean, nothing more Henry County than talking about the Skunk River.
There's no doubt.
Damn right.
I've been down the Skunk River. Hell, I know that one.
I've walked down it when the canoe water was too low.
Yeah.
I'll let Curt decide on the place the donation should go. But I will tell you, I'm the president of the Auburn Interfaith Food Closet in Auburn, California. And there are food closets all over the country. And they are an example of a need. And it's not just because people are homeless, though that's a portion of it, but it's people that are at the edge of employment. One of the things that gives me hope is that the day COVID started, the number of people coming to us dropped in half. And that's totally opposite what people thought would happen. And as we've invested, it's reverted. But what happened for that first year was that enough government programs occurred that provided more unemployment benefits and extension and the child tax credit. There were a lot of people who suddenly had more money in their pockets. And these are people who would like not to be dependent. Mm-hmm. They would like to be able to be independent. And when they didn't need to use that money, but when they didn't need to come to us to stretch the budget that much, they didn't. Now that many of those programs have stopped and we're starting to see a inflation affecting all costs, we're seeing the opposite. We're seeing it grow back, and we're now past where we were before COVID started. But that window in which you really got a sense that there are people that are not able to participate in society the way we're able to, the same way. They have goals, they have desires, and we see people who come through now donating because they've gotten themselves out. We have about 10% of the people coming to us who are veteran families, and a subset of those are very difficult from a mental perspective and on the streets. And there are programs there, and there are people ready to help them. And so hopefully those we touch know that. And if not, we help them find those things. That's one of our missions, is not just provide food, but also help provide resources and connect people. And so I think what I get to see in our little community is 200 volunteers giving over 20,000 hours a year to do a service. And there's lots of nonprofits out there and lots of organizations. And I think that's what gives me hope, is we will fill in the gaps that are needed, and at the same time support each other.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Well, send us a link for that, so we'll hit those guys up, because we've primarily gone through Feeding America and/or locally for us is Second Harvest out of Silicon Valley folks, because they're right here in San Jose area, and hitting the folks that we are around all the time. So the food bank thing and helping that happen. And I think you're absolutely right. People really, they want to work off and be sustainable and do all those kind of things. And so some of these temporary things are really helpful.
And the three basics that we all take for granted: food, shelter, and health. Yep. The first thing, if we can give people shelter, you find a way to, if you have a place to come home to them, and it gives you hope. It's like that letter in the pocket, and they have to eat, and those two things are the primaries. And a lot of these people, though, they will give their food to somebody else if they think they're more needy. So it's we can give more. Okay.
All right, Curtis, close this out. What do you got, Pat?
Oh, I just said, well said. Maslow's hierarchy of need.
Yep.
If you're cold, wet, and hungry, you're not going to learn. You're not going to function.
Yep.
All right, Curtis, you want to close us out with hope?
Yeah. I'll start with thankful. As I go through this transition and the services that I'm being provided as I exit, I really thank the era of my grandfather, the Korean veterans, the Vietnam veterans, who had to suffer and didn't get the services that we're getting now. Because of them and because of what they went through, it really shapes the betterment of the treatment that myself and fellow veterans are receiving in our current life and our afterlife from the military. So I'm really thankful for the generations past in the way it shaped the present and the future care that we're going to receive. My hope is that I could walk in the footsteps of my grandfather, my father, and others in being able to provide back while I provide for my youngins, and that I'm that follow-on inspiration to them to follow in those footsteps. That's where we're going to grow, and hopefully I can do that and be that next guy that's at a food closet just donating my time when he could just be selfish and not on the golf course.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm hopeful when we get to hear these stories, because it's really inspiring to hear the generations that have come before and the things that they were focused on and what they were willing to do. And I'm right with Pat on that. It's like I do get around all kinds of age groups, particularly I get around a lot of professional athletes, and they're a different animal. Some of them are and some of them aren't, you know what I mean? But like, there's a lot of wisdom there. There's a lot of insight, a lot of creativity, and a lot of people that have compassion and care about the world. And so hopefully we're laying down a track that allows them to stand on it and keep climbing and build forward. And I guess, Curt, I'd close with the one notion that you guys were talking about. And I think Ed represented that. And I think, Andy, you mentioned it about how we just need to keep listening to each other and keep talking, because and I've said this 100 times on this show, we have a lot more in common, because the Maslow hierarchy, we all want that for all of our family members.
Right.
And we might disagree on how we think we should get there, but let's not forget really the ultimate thing that we're trying to do is create that opportunity for everybody. And maybe we can focus on what brings us together instead of what separates us. So, all right. Well, gentlemen, I appreciate it very much. Thank you. That was amazing.
Coach, if I can, I just, on behalf of all the service members that you've helped out, you, your son, and your organization, I just want to say thank you. You guys could do the program November Military Appreciation Month, but you guys say to hell with that. And you guys are 365 days a year. And I can't thank you enough for what you guys are doing for us or for service members. It's awe-inspiring, and it's definitely impacting everyone that you touch.
Well, I appreciate that. And I don't know if you saw this, they have the My Cleats, My Cause.
Yep.
And so George is wearing MVP cleats this year. So that's kind of fun. We did that. And just a shout out I think the voting though is closed for the public. So he was nominated by the Niners for the Salute to Service. So we're very just honored to be in that conversation with folks on that one as well. So it's been great. So it's been a great partnership, and we're excited to tell stories and hopefully opening path to healing and integration is kind of what we're really hoping to do. So that's great. So, all right. Well, gentlemen, Hayes family, thank you so much. Ed, thanks for being here too, because I feel Ed and Cora were floating around. So that's pretty cool. Pat, I hope you get that plastic surgery done soon, because you're an ugly mug, but we love you. All right. And you guys take care. So Emma put this together. We usually publish on Saturdays before Sunday games. So I'll shoot you guys both a link. So you can zip right to it. It'll be up on YouTube, or you can listen to it on any of the podcast channels. So that's great. So thank you very, very much. Really appreciate it. All right.
Thanks,
All
Coach.
right. Take care,
Thanks,
guys.
Bruce.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, bye-bye.
See ya.
Bye, Patty. Thanks.
Yep.
Three, two, one, action. All right. Hey, guys. Wow. I thought that was a great show. And I don't know what you took from it. I know as I was listening to it and just kind of overwhelmed with the degree of kind of commitment, sacrifice, and service that Ed provided to the Drake Law School for all of those years, and just the legal community and the state of Iowa, and just beyond that, always volunteering at a food bank. And now his son, Andy, is part of the food bank in his hometown. And you guys know that we have partnered with Feeding America and Second Valley of Silicon Valley, Second Harvest of Silicon Valley. So again, just thinking about the food, but just the story that Ed presents and the way things were disrupted, the sacrifices that were required to get us through World War II. And so I guess if you're watching this and December 7th is coming or just went, just remembering the sacrifices that were made, the way in which the United States got pulled into that war, and the things that people did in order to respond, protect the United States. And again, the very many sacrifices, whether it was staying at home and farming and feeding the world and America, whether it was working in a factory, whether it was in the front lines, or whether it was a legal clerk, whatever that might have been, people were committed to coming together, working as a team, and protecting the world. And so we're still in that same boat. So let's keep coming together, and my best wishes to you for the holiday season as they're approaching. Remember to be uniquely you, and don't be afraid to set some boundaries, and enjoy that, and just keep with your breath. And again, as always, if you enjoyed the show, we'd love to have a rating from you. If you don't mind clicking that old 5-star button, that'd be great. And you can always give us feedback on the Thunderproof Performance website via email. So anyway, hope you enjoy the show. Hope you enjoyed it, and really enjoyed being part of it, and grateful that we have the opportunity to share these kind of stories, so that we can truly remember the generations that came before us, and all that they have done in order to give us the lives that we currently have. So thank you. Cut.